Welcome to Scouting for Growth, the podcast where we explore the latest ideas in technology, innovation, and business transformation. I'm Sabine van der Linden, your host. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Areiel Wolanow, a LinkedIn top voice in AI, quantum computing, and emerging technologies, and the managing director of Finserv Experts. From helping global tech giants navigate AI regulations to advising central banks on quantum resilience, Areiel has a proven track record of turning complex issues into real world solutions. One reason this conversation is so timely. It is the explosive growth of AI in the corporate world. According to PwC, AI could contribute up to $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030, so 5 years from now. In fact, recent industry reports show that more than 70% of businesses are now exploring or adopting AI, in particular AI agents. Recognizing its potential to boost efficiency, streamline operations, and unlock new revenue streams. The question, though, of course, is how to harness this potential responsibly and strategically. Questions that Areiel is uniquely qualified to answer. In our discussion, we will explore why AI has become an essential pillar for enterprise growth, how quantum is primed to reshape risk and cybersecurity strategies, and what emerging innovations are set to redefine the future of work. We will also dive into actionable ways to leverage these technologies in your organization. So, get ready for a fascinating deep dive into AI, quantum, and beyond. Because when it comes to leading edge tech, Areiel Wolanow knows how to walk the talk. Let's get started. Hi, Areiel. Thank you very much for joining me on the Scouting for Growth podcast.
It's great to be here. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. So, Areiel, let's get started with a little bit of a deep dive about you. Tell us about who you are, what do you do every day, and actually the transformation you have gone through, because we know each other from time in IBM, actually.
Indeed. So my name is Areiel Wolanow. I run a small consultancy called Finserv Experts. And we are an emerging tech consultancy, but with a slight difference. We focus not on the technology itself, but on the business models the tech enables. During my time at IBM, indeed before that, in the 90s, when I was working as a programmer during the dot-com boom in Silicon Valley, I've noticed that the same pattern emerges with pretty much every emerging tech that I've been involved with. The internet itself initially, mobile, IoT, robotics, blockchain, AI, and now quantum computing. Same thing happens every time. A new technology comes along, has the potential to be disruptive and to change the world, both commercially and in terms of making the world a better place. And people and companies throw tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars at these technologies, use them to re-engineer their existing business models, and then are surprised that these projects, even when they succeed, don't deliver any return. So when I left IBM in 2016, I was with them for about 12 years. And the latter part of my time there was building new consulting practices for them. I launched the financial services practice for East Africa. In that team, I had the honor to deliver probably the most impactful project of my career, which was being the solution architect and program director for designing the credit scoring engine for M-Pesa in Kenya, which subsequently, through making capital available to small businesses, grew the GDP per capita of the country by 50% in about 5 years. Then I went to Singapore, launched IBM's blockchain services practice for the ASEAN region, delivered IBM's very first blockchain engagement, which was letter of credit origination prototype for HSBC and Bank of America. So in 2016, I said, okay, I've launched 2 consulting practices for IBM. Time to do it for myself. And I did it with that principle and with that awareness to say we are actually focusing on the business models that would not be possible without emerging tech.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because we have something similar, right? We work with tech companies for a while, and then we've realized that, it's great to learn from those big giants, but, to drive resiliency in some ways nowadays, you need to do it for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, my time at IBM was a blessing. I got a chance to work on problems of the scope and scale that I would never have had the chance to uh, without that, and I'm deeply grateful for it. But it was the right time to make a move.
Yes. So you have helped small and big businesses, right? And when I think about small businesses, you are helping them fund, investment rounds
Mm-hmm.
from investors. And when you look at big companies, you have helped companies like Google with their AI
Mm-hmm.
needs. So tell us what it takes to harness artificial intelligence today.
Well, I guess at a basic level, it's not different than applying any other emerging tech. You have to you have to start you have to move backwards and then forwards. Usually, when I am brought in, uh, I'm brought in to solve a problem. And sometimes the problem that I'm brought in to solve is the actual problem, in which case it's very simple. I just
Mhm.
get on and do it. Sometimes not. So the first thing you have to do in terms of helping people is to say, okay, is the proximate cause the real problem? Um, and they're depending on what the problem domain is, there's various ways you can assess that. So you have to go one step back and say, okay, so what is the underlying problem? And then you have to basically gauge, and this is the same for both very large and very small companies. You have to gauge the maturity of the organization. So sometimes it's just like I said, an acute problem that needs fixing. Other times it's a question of gaps in the organization's capability. And if that's the case, again, there's lots of tools. There's very well developed and easy to use maturity models for assessing this sort of thing. But then you have to further step back and say, is the organization aware? Do they have self-awareness? If I were just to do a maturity model assessment, would that make sense? Would it be actionable? And sometimes the answer is no, in which case there's some fundamental education that you have to do first. So build some self-awareness, then you can apply a maturity model, then you can do a gap analysis, and then you can fix the problem. And the reality, and it's from place to place, you know, where you're starting can be very, very different.
Yeah. So we talk about big and small businesses. Now I want to talk about the regulator and legislations, right? Responsible artificial intelligence is critical today.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we balance, that need to deliver artificial intelligence? We are all talking about agentic AI right now.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, be compliant, ethical, responsible.
Well, so ultimately, there's a difference between a regulatory burden and uh, representing to your investors, customers, stakeholders, employees that you're using AI responsibly. There's a lot of attention that goes on just beyond the regulatory law. And the weird thing is that probably one of the best AI regulations out there is the EU AI Act, but this is very counterintuitive, but it actually benefits AI companies outside the EU more than it benefits within. Let me explain how that works. So the legislation's a beast. It's about 400 pages long. And when I read it, what I came away with was actually, I was impressed. It was an incredibly well written and nuanced. It's probably the best piece of regulation I've ever read. Actually, the people who wrote it really understood and at least attempted to write a regulation that was flexible, that could grow with the industry, and that really understood the capabilities and risks, and created something that didn't necessarily, wouldn't necessarily be obsolete the day after it was released. However, it's still a regulation. Compliance with it is no joke. But as a guideline for how to use AI responsibly and how to assess risk, it's actually really good. So the firms outside of the EU, it's a resource. You can go read this. You can say, okay, so here's some risk categories. Here's some appropriate things to do. Here's how you establish accountability. So you can use the good bits, and there's a lot of good bits in the regulation without having the cost of compliance. And what you've seen is entire countries, Thailand, Brazil, others, have taken that. They've said, follow this as a benchmark. We're not going to, we're not going to, you're not going to report to the EU bodies. But this regulation is hugely beneficial outside the EU because it gives a lot of great guidance and feedback on how to manage risk effectively.
And so for you, when you look at some of these principles and regulatory recommendations, let's say, what are the one you think are, so incredibly well written that company needs to pay attention to?
Well, so the first thing is that, is at the very high level, the way the EU breaks down AI solutions into risk categories. There are some so risky, we just don't want to do them. Social scoring, using it to manipulate behavior without disclosure, tracking people through public without a court order. So there's a whole category of things that say they're so risky, we're not going to do them. Other things have immense potential, but they're high risk. Other things are low risk. Now, the math, from a pure math standpoint, and I'll give you an example of, one of the most sophisticated pieces of AI you use every day, and people don't realize this, is your mouse. Okay, if I move my mouse 2 centimeters, the cursor doesn't move 2 centimeters.
Yeah.
The mouse's software is continually figuring what I actually mean to do when I move that mouse. The level of sophistication of that AI model is mind-boggling, and it's obvious it's pre-Gen AI, but you've been doing it for a long time. But nobody's worried about the social impact of mouse AI.
Yeah,
right. So
it's understanding your behavior,
Yeah,
or maybe understanding if you have
it is
a
absolutely AI software, but there's zero risk associated with using it. Other things, if you're going to use it to educate children, you're going to use it for medical diagnosis. Well, you want to make sure you're doing this right.
Indeed.
You're doing this for self-driving
And you could,
cars.
right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's not any different.
And that's one of the great things the AI Act does. Is that, okay, so here's some risk categories, and here's a set of appropriate controls. And you don't have to worry about, again, the cost of compliance unless you're in the EU. But those, most of the controls just make sense. You would want to do them, and if you automate the collection of evidence so that it's not costing you an arm and a leg, and that's obviously that's a full disclosure. This is one of the things we do. So this is a self-interested statement. But if you automate the collection of evidence, the cost of compliance can be quite small. You say, yeah, we follow these patterns of accountability. And patterns of accountability is the key because, and medical diagnosis is a great example. So doctors have been using AI to help spot markers for potential disease and potential problems for over a decade now. It's a pure net positive in the sense that even the best doctor in the world cannot stay in touch with all medical research going on around the planet. So AI can suggest things that, like I said, even the most competent doctor would never be able to find. But at the end of the day, it's the doctor's name that goes on the diagnosis. The doctor signs it. The doctor is legally accountable. The doctor is liable for malpractice insurance, not the AI.
Correct.
So that's a great case. Everybody understands the pattern of accountability. The AI is a decision support tool for the doctor.
Or a consultant. I think the same apply to consultants using artificial intelligence to do their day-to-day jobs.
There was a great there was a lawsuit against Lufthansa in 2009. 2 people ended up sitting next to each other on a plane and discovered that one of them paid about 50 euros for the ticket and the other paid about 500 euros. And they sued Lufthansa for discrimination. And Lufthansa's argument was that we didn't discriminate. We don't know who these people are, what their race, what their gender is. The algorithm just determined the pricing. And the court found against Lufthansa and said, doesn't matter. You are responsible for the actions of your software. So there's a solid body of legal evidence and just common sense thinking that says when you have an AI do something, there has to be a human accountable for the decisions. And what that does, and that human's job doesn't go away, it changes. Okay.
So can I check with you? In cars, we are moving from electric cars to autonomous driving. The whole car will potentially, we are not going to drive that car.
Yep.
The machine is driving us. So who is liable here?
Well, so I mean, and the great thing is you come from insurance. You understand subrogation.
I do. But I need to ask you that question anyway.
The patterns of subrogation will need to be defined, and they'll be defined in the legal contracts. Okay. At the end of the day, the driver who gets in the accident is liable at the first point. The driver can potentially subrogate the risk, saying, my car, but the driver will still be the one found at fault. The driver then can seek subrogation from the manufacturer of the car or the dealer, and the dealer could potentially go to the manufacturer. The manufacturer can go to the company that developed the algorithm. As long as those patterns of accountability are clear and are defined in contracts, well, we know how to operate this ecosystem. This is not a new structure for us. But we have to make sure we get those patterns clear. So now I've done some work in AI with. Are you familiar with the law firm CMS?
Yeah, for sure,
One of the
CMS.
largest law firms in the world. So they hired me a few years back to work with them and help think about how they deliver AI assessments to their clients. Not on the legal side. CMS does not need my help with tech law. They are amongst the best in the world. But with regards to mapping that law to the solutions that are out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you have mentioned now quite a few examples, and I would like to think in terms of digital transformation, right? You work, as you said, with large corporations and you help them implement AI systems.
Mm-hmm.
Now we are talking about agents,
Mm-hmm.
system, multi-agent platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are most critical, you think, when you start looking at this type of transformation to make sure that they're implementing effectively and properly?
It's actually not that much different from how you would do business transformation with humans. So, and again, I'm going to use an older example, but it's a good illustrative one. Back in the 1950s, the job of an accountant was to prepare consolidated financial statements for large companies. So they would gather ledgers and they would consolidate the ledgers into larger accounts, and eventually they'd be able to put together a financial report that um, that stated the position of a company, and then they would sign an opinion saying we believe this fairly represents the financial position of this company. So in 1955, we had the first digital ledger, the payroll system for General Electric in White Plains, New York, and that unlocked scale because now an accountant wasn't preparing the ledger; they were examining it to make sure it was correct. Okay, the accountant still signs the opinion.
Mm-hmm.
They still, but the job of the accountant is now a substantively different, how they go about building enough confidence to sign that opinion, completely different. They are no longer physically preparing the consolidated statements. They are making sure the computer prepared the statement correctly. AI is basically another step along that line. You have somebody who does a job, that job is a component within the operating model of a company's say order to cash cycle, and there are KPIs to say, okay, so these are the suppliers of inputs to this job. These are the consumers of outputs to the job. These are the KPIs. Measure how this job is done. Now somebody else, possibly an AI agent, is going to do that job. KPIs haven't changed. Inputs haven't changed. Outputs haven't changed. You may want to change them. I said, this may unlock different ways of doing business, but at the coalface, it's a job. It has KPIs. It has suppliers. It has consumers. It has, at least right now, a defined method for how to manage it and how to measure what good looks like.
Yeah.
So it is just basically figuring out how to respect the contracts, if you will, that agent has with its suppliers, with its downstream consumers, and say, is there an opportunity apart from just replacing a human with software to do it differently?
And I think that's where it's important, right? I think old method of
Mm-hmm.
building system may not be the approach when you start looking at AI system of tomorrow, because some of the activity we used to do may disappear, but then we can become a bit more effective by redesigning the whole process altogether.
No, it's a great point. And what you'll find, as with other digital transformations, some people will do the AI equivalent of screen scraping. They will just basically say, here's a human, here's an agent, does what the human does, and they'll stop there. These are obviously missing out, and there's an argument that they're acting unethically. What makes more sense is to say, given that you can now have an AI agent do this, you have humans who have presumably a lot of domain knowledge. How can you use that in a proactive way?
100%.
Because we are not yet at the point where, as the AI agents acquire their own domain knowledge, we can query that in the same way that a human can notice patterns or notice changes and question and alert. It'll come, but that's yet another generation down the line.
Mm-hmm.
100%. So you are mentioning that those systems, still need to apply proper
Mhm.
processes and approach to be implemented. Now, I think we are suffering from a talent gap. So
Mhm.
how do we get to make sure that people are reskilled and upskilled in the right way to actually embrace this AI revolution? Just yesterday, I had a conversation with somebody who said, it was actually on my LinkedIn feed,
Mhm.
stating, I was talking to this young person and who's fighting against artificial intelligence and
Mhm.
intend not to learn about AI.
Mm.
Are we going to have some, I would say, AI literacy discrimination?
Well, it's interesting because um, uh, my experience is actually, in many ways, almost the opposite, in the sense that, actually, I'll give you an example. About 4 weeks ago, I was doing some sales work for an opportunity that we were chasing, and I had some research that needed to be done very quickly because I had a sales meeting 3 days later. So one of the members of our firm is works with us part time. His full time job is he's a professor of AI at a university in New York. So I called him and I said, is one of your students who'd be willing to help me with this research. I'll, assuming I'm happy with it, I'll write a LinkedIn recommendation, et cetera. It's a half day of work. It's not a lot of work. So he recommended one of his top students, and she did a great job. But I was so impressed with the quality of it that I said, well, can you show me your methodology? Tell me how you got these answers, because it was better than I could have done myself if I had had the time. And that's an important point. She did a better job on this than I could have. So she walked me through it, and I came to realize that and she's in her early 20s. There is a gap, but the gap is the other way. Um, and again, I always look for to predict the future. I always look in the past. When you look at when programming world went from procedural to object-oriented programming, what you found was that the newer programmers were more productive than the older ones. The people who started their education learning object-oriented programming were much more capable than people who started, like me, learning procedural languages and then had to adapt. I think we're seeing the same thing now. I think
Interesting.
the AI natives, if I can call them that, are much more capable. And the I guess the sort of old crotchety boomer thing is, well, these kids are going to use AI and they're going to be lazy. It's just the opposite. They're going to use AI and they're going to actually be taught from the beginning that they have to critically question. Whereas some older people might say, well, the
I'd say
ChatGPT
so.
gave me the answer. So I actually think that there's a structural advantage to AI natives and that they're going to do a better job. And that informs that's real world. That informs how I'm designing my delivery teams. So I am making I'm putting some very young people in positions of leadership. I have to provide them with support, obviously,
Hmm.
to make sure that they're going to they're going to operate successfully and have somebody to rely on when clients or they're challenged in a way they don't know how to handle. But in terms of the core ability, they're actually more productive than people with more experience. The same is going to be true with quantum. People who learn quantum, because quantum programming is so radically different from the way we program classical computers. The people who learn it from scratch are going to be worlds, oceans better than those of us who have to figure out how to jump from one to the other.
Yeah. Well, you just jumped into the quantum revolution and resilience. And the question I had for you, actually, Ariel, is you talk about quantum resilience
Mm.
for organization. So what does that mean, right? And why should business start thinking about it right now? Because even though quantum is not yet mainstream.
No, 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 it's not, and don't believe the hype. There's varying views. The earliest predictions I've seen are 3 years, and the latest I've seen are like 20 years. So
Mhm.
nobody knows when quantum computing is going to become
Is it going to
commercially
be like
available.
ChatGPT and one day,
Yes,
November
yes,
2022 is like, it's
yeah,
working?
yes. It almost certainly will be, but understanding quantum is hard. And I started teaching it to myself in 2019, and understanding the detailed operation of quantum mechanics is just at the edge of my intellectual capability. So if I actually want to sit down and understand the quantum mechanic angle of it, I literally have to sit in a dark room, door closed, no music, no light, tiniest distraction. So it's right at the edge of my cognitive abilities. And these are some really Teflon coated ideas. But part of my job is to make it accessible. So I'll try to do that. Quantum resilience is basically ensuring that your data. So and I mean that in the broadest sense. So your stored data, so your HR system, how much your employees make, your customer data, your IP, your email, your voice messages, your live teleconferences. All of these are based on encryption methods that ultimately come down to one thing, which is how hard it is to find the factors, the multiplicative factors of very, very, very large numbers.
Is it like Prime Target?
What?
Prime Target movie.
Yeah.
On
yes.
on Apple.
So factoring large numbers and indeed prime numbers is the basis for pretty much all of the industry standard encryption in the world today, because it's very hard for computers to do. They can't do it. So in 1994, there was a professor at MIT named Peter Shor who wrote an algorithm and said, this is how a computer can factor large numbers. And this algorithm is really simple. It's only 6 steps long, and it's easy to program. So literally, this is something that it's called Shor's algorithm. His name is Peter Shor. If you have a bachelor's degree in math and 2 months of Python training, it would take you about half an hour to write a program to run Shor's algorithm.
And to decrypt or encrypt.
Yeah. So you could ask, well, if it's that easy, then why hasn't it happened? This is in 1994. That program would only take half an hour to write. But if you gave that program to the most powerful supercomputer in the world today and said, run this, the amount of time it would take to execute it, and actually to make it even smaller, the program has 6 steps. 5 of those 6 steps, no problem. So it was one step, third step of this 6-step algorithm. It would take the most powerful supercomputer longer to execute that one step than the amount of time from the start of the universe till now.
Okay.
That's what quantum computers will change.
That first step.
Yeah, that the third step in Shor's algorithm, quantum computers will be able to do that in a matter of minutes or hours. So much so that criminals, who are always the first adopters of any new technology, the scam artists are the first to arrive. It was true in the internet. It was true in mobile. It was true in blockchain. Okay, and criminals have a structural advantage because they have no governance. They have no compliance requirements. They don't care about customer satisfaction. So they have a built-in first mover advantage. They will always be the first adopters of any new technology. Quantum will be no different. So the idea of quantum computing is how can we be ready for people who will use this to crack our data. And criminals are harvesting data now. There's, if you look on the dark web, there's a lot of what's called HNDL activity, which is harvest now, decrypt later. So criminals are already harvesting this data now in the belief that they will be able to, they're downloading password files like crazy because they think in some number of years they'll be able to crack these passwords and people won't change them.
You have to please change your password every year, at least over 6 months.
But so criminals are already investing in that day. So quantum resilience is basically about making sure that companies have their data protected before that day arrives. And the good news is there are ways to make your data safe that don't require quantum computing. So you can start doing those things now. NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology, which is the part of the U.S. government that sets the technical standards for. It's not a regulation because the U.S. generally doesn't like regulation, but it's basically if you want to do business with us, if you want the government to be your client, you have to live up to this standard. So it's kind of a de facto regulation without actually being a compliance requirement. So NIST ran a competition for quantum resilient algorithms. They started this in 2016. In 2022, they announced the first winners. So it's ongoing. There will be more, but there are now 4 algorithms that have been certified by the U.S. government as quantum safe. And they're open source. Anyone can use them. So there is the ability now to start making your data safe. There isn't yet, while it's open source, there's not yet enterprise support. So think the difference between Linux, open source, Red Hat provides support that, so somebody you can actually go to, if there's a problem, keep the code up to date, et cetera. So there isn't yet enterprise support, but these algorithms exist. So what we're doing now, and in fact, the only reasonable thing you do, so we're not doing any quantum computing because it's not commercially available yet. We're doing some POCs and some research, but it's minor. It's very minor. What we're really doing now is helping companies plan. So if you think about the average CIO, he's got a portfolio of applications, and typically for a large company, this runs in the thousands of different software applications. Some of those applications are already quantum resilient now. Zoom last year already did this transformation. So Zoom, quantum resilient today. Others are not quantum resilient today, but it's in their roadmap. And so we've committed we will be quantum resilient, and you can trust. So Microsoft Office, great example. It's quantum resilient in the roadmap. So probably before Q-Day gets here, it'll be fine. Some of them don't have quantum resilience in their roadmap, but have a modern architecture where the encryption is pluggable. So if the company doesn't fix it, I can fix it. Now it's more expensive because now I have a cost of ownership problem, but at least I can do it. There's something physically I say, okay, well, I will just replace the encryption it came with this other encryption that is quantum resilient. SQL Server is a good example. But there's going to be a lot of programs, and I haven't done the scientific, but in the few places where we've been paid to come in and do this planning, it's about 20 to 30%. 20 to 30% of the applications will have no path to quantum resilience, and a lot of times these are mission-critical, homegrown systems where the programmers who wrote it left long ago. There's no documentation, and there's no pathway to quantum resilience. Now, if you know about that 3 to 5 years in advance, well, you just put it into your calendar, and
do some work.
you actually probably, it'll change your priority, but it may not even change your IT budget that much. So you just work it into your business.
But it sounds like you have to make choices slightly differently, though, right? You have to look at all the systems you are using. You have to actually use reliable platform. You mentioned Microsoft, you mentioned Zoom, I guess Google, AWS, all those cloud-based systems will have a quantum resilience pathway already are quantum resilient. So you have to make choices. And then when you start looking at all those AI platforms that we're using every day, whether it's an OpenAI or Perplexity or Claude, we just need to make sure that we are not adding.
Well, and that's actually one of the biggest challenges in the work we're doing now, which is the so-called shadow IT problem. And this is affecting both big companies and small. So on the large side, IBM did a survey in 2023. They looked at Fortune 1000 companies, and they found that 1/3 of all employees, Fortune 1000 companies, are using software products that their IT doesn't know about. Usually it's just a cloud app on a browser, but it's with corporate data, so that data is vulnerable. And if they, even the best IT organization, if they don't know that people are using it, there's nothing they can do. When you get beyond outside the Fortune 1000 and you look into small and medium businesses, it's considerably worse. Google hired Netscope to do some research. 97% of Google Workspace users have given some of their corporate data to cloud apps that their own IT department doesn't even know about. 97, so basically everyone is just using cloud apps to do their job. So how can an IT organization protect when it doesn't even know? So full circle, finding the shadow IT problem is a job for AI. And that's another part of what we do. The shadow IT discovery is actually the biggest challenge in any quantum resilience plan. But even in regular cybersecurity, nothing to do with quantum, that shadow IT is a huge challenge.
So how are you educating, I guess, legislators as much as C-suite for that awareness around quantum? And, think about our industry, finance, insurance, highly regulated, but older industries. How do you prepare them?
Well, so I try to use constructs that they're familiar with. So for quantum resilience, we have a quantum resilience maturity model. People are familiar with maturity models.
Absolutely.
Businesses, technologists, because they're existing standards. So we've modeled our maturity model on CMMI, because that's something that everybody knows how to use. Whether you're using some of the NIST frameworks, whether you're using COBIT, so we're trying to basically use some of the frameworks. So I've done a lot of work with transnational organizations. I've worked with the World Trade Organization, World Economic Forum, G20, and that alignment to international standards is key. And again, just try to give it an analog. The job of your enterprise technical architect, Their main job is to ensure that software a company uses is safe. It's not going to get hacked. It's going to stay up. It's going to, and at a, at an enterprise level, these are usually very seasoned, very knowledgeable, very capable people, enterprise architects. So a company is thinking of using or building a software application. What does not happen is the architect comes in and does their professional analysis, does a good job, and does say this is good. That's not because if they say it that way, and you'll understand this, they're accepting unlimited risk. They're saying I am now, by saying, having passed given an opinion saying this is good, I am now have unlimited liability because I gave an opinion. So what an architect does instead, they don't say this is good. They say, I've examined it and this meets a certain set of standards. Okay? So it could still be hacked, but I have done something that I can defend, and there's a transfer risk. They said, okay, anything beyond complying with this standard is still a risk. Okay, and maybe you can insure that risk. Because it's now pretty easy to get cyber insurance. It wasn't 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I guess around the technical risk, there are still things which cannot be insured.
So it's going to be the same with AI, and it's going to be the same with quantum. The reason we use these these internationally recognized frameworks is so that there is a baseline of risk. And this was a huge problem with blockchain, by the way. So this work we did with Bank of America HSBC, building the solution took 15 weeks. Finished on time, under budget. Getting architectural approval to even use the solution pilot, a year and a half. Not because the architects didn't believe in it. They loved it. They thought it was more secure than what they had. But the standard, and this is a standard most banks have and should have, is the bank's data, its customers' data, never goes beyond the firewall. You can't even bring a USB stick into a bank. And that's good. I mean, I have no problem with that. So thinking about blockchain for a second, on what basis can an architect ever approve a blockchain application, which by definition is going to put an bank's entire book of business in the data center of every single one of its competitors? There is no standard for saying yes to that, even if it's actually more secure than their legacy system, because by definition, blockchain federates that data out to a bunch of nodes that don't live in the bank. So it took a year and a half to find a way to a standard by which they could say, we approve this for use, even though they thought it was more secure. We're going to have those same problems with AI. We're going to have those same problems with quantum.
Yeah. So you already went, you just went into emerging technology, Areiel. So when you start looking at AI, we talked about quantum as well, and now the blockchain. When you look at the research you are doing around all those different technologies, how do you make sure you always focus on, I guess, the relevant trends around the latest trend to actually prepare customers, the market?
It's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of I've been asked to look at a lot of business cases for AI, for blockchain. Not so many for quantum yet, but it's coming. And many of the business cases, many of the pitch decks, all base their business model, their revenue projections on the existence of an ecosystem, a network, and if not richly, at least somewhat populated data on which to operate. And many of these things are very good ideas. And if you make that assumption about the existence of such a trading network, the assumptions make sense. They hold to water, that they are sound. But those business cases, to my knowledge, always fail because they offer no incentive for the first adopter. So none of these benefits accrue unless the network already exists. So the first litmus test that I use in assessing the viability of a business idea and innovation is, does it deliver value to the first adopter, not the 20th, not the nth adopter? What does the very first person to use your idea get when no one else is using it? So it doesn't matter whether it's blockchain, digital ID, self-sovereign identity, AI, AI enforced medical data, all of these things. The ones that succeed are the ones who have figured out a way of delivering value to the first adopter. That is the ultimate the litmus test for what makes a good idea. It delivers value to the first adopter.
Yeah. And so looking at all the promises from emerging technologies, how do you help your clients, move away from the hype and focus on reality to deliver value to their businesses?
Well, sometimes I don't.
Okay.
Sometimes, actually more than half the time, I can't see a way that I'm going to add value. I've had lots of people come say, "All right, I want to do blockchain," whatever that means.
What problem do you want to solve?
And if I don't, I usually try to discourage people because I don't like seeing people waste their money. And if they're insistent on it, I'll refer them to someone, technically competent who can help them. But a lot of times, this is a litmus test that fails. When it succeeds, it's like, and what I'm saying is not differentiated. It's not rocket science. You need to validate the demand. You may need to make sure you're not a solution looking for a problem. A lot of the truisms about technology. You sort of start with that. A good startup should be validating demand and lining up customers well before it writes the first line of code. Because and again, particularly with AI, we've gotten to the point where technology should never be the constraint. You need to validate the business model, have a subscriber, and then you should be able to produce a technical solution in very little time these days. Yeah. It doesn't take much.
Yeah, no, nowadays it's very shrunk, and I think you can do so much now. And I talk to a lot of AI, agents, builders, and it's fascinating to hear that, people can start using very basic technology, within 6 to 8 weeks to actually automate some of the internal processes to deliver value, but still having the human in the loop to actually engage with the client. Now, we often talk about partnership and ecosystems. What's your view of where we sit today in the current world to balance the way we collaborate with legislators and regulators, startups, corporates? What's your view for us to be successful in the future by looking at all those different actors and stakeholders?
So my business partner, Kafira, who I think you know, has come up with a great way of describing this. She describes two different, and this is a level above business model, but two different mindsets, which she calls the pie and the forest. The older mindset is the pie mindset, which is you view the market as a piece of pie. If I take a larger piece, there's a smaller piece for everyone else. Okay. Whereas forests grow. And if one tree grows, then the whole forest grows. And she gave a fabulous talk on this at LEAP that was extremely well received. The pie mindset is not wrong, and the forest mindset is not right. It's a question of where they apply. There are, even in today's modern world, there are places where it's absolutely correct to look at the world with a pie mindset. But usually, when you're talking about brand new innovations, new business models, you're much better off approaching it from a forest mindset, which is why you see those proliferations of ecosystems and partnerships. Now, on the other hand, it's an overused,
right?
It's an overused word. I get on average between 40 and 50, and I've measured this, requests on LinkedIn a week from software companies wanting to partner with me.
Correct.
Which means they want me to hire them. I wish I had that much work. But a lot of times when people say partners, you should check where your wallet is because they just want you to pay them to do something.
And what, the true understanding of what partnership is, right? It's making sure that 1 + 1 = 3. And often, building a partnership requires for people to put their own money into the project to achieve a common goal. So it's not about hiring.
Yeah. No. So, and I think there's, to get ruthlessly pragmatic about it, when two separate companies with their own mission statements, their own profit their own profit objectives collaborate, there's three things you can bring to the table: money, customers, and work.
Yeah.
Okay. And so a true partnership, both companies have to be providing at least one of those three things commensurate to what the other is bringing, and they're not valued equally. And again, to take the case of there are thousands upon thousands of software development companies who have work, have access to work. They can provide work, but they don't have access to customers. So of those, the most valuable contribute to a partnership is somebody who can bring customers. Okay, work is the least valuable. Why? Because the work is easier now. The barrier to entry to build software is incredibly low. So it's commoditized. So really work is such a small piece that it's really about money and customers. And if you can't bring one of those two things to the partnership, it's not a partnership.
Yeah. So my last question to you, Areiel, which is really about providing advice. You have witnessed so many market shifts, right? We started with M-Pesa, we started with
it started with
IBM.
the internet. So I started work in 1988, Silicon Valley.
Right. So you have seen the shifts, industrial shift, technological shifts. So what advice would you give leaders out there who are eager to innovate, but concerned about the human, cultural, and ethical implication of all the stuff which are happening right now?
Yeah, I would say the best advice I could be is put an outsized and potentially even unreasonable level of responsibility on the natives of that technology, on your youngest team members. And I will give you a great success story. And this actually comes from M-Pesa. So this is the product, which is called Mshwari, which is lending over M-Pesa, was invented by the CEO and chairman of Commercial Bank of Africa, a guy named Isaac Awunde. And Isaac basically told me the story about this. He said, when I looked at M-Pesa, Isaac said, I realized that it was very, very simple in concept. You were taking your phone's top-up balance, because almost nobody in Kenya has a monthly contract. It's all top-up. And you're using your top-up balance as your current account. That's all M-Pesa is. You're using your top-up balance as your current account. So I reasoned, well, if you can use your phone as your current account, why can't you do other banking services, deposits, and lending as well? So I took it to my heads of business, and they all told me it's impossible. I can't do it. So needless to say, I didn't listen to them because I thought it could be done. Now, if I took, and again, so this is Isaac speaking to me, if I took this standard banking approach, which is to build an innovation center, I build an innovation center, I hire some bright young talent, they build it, they do a proof of concept, and then they hand it to the people that told me it was impossible. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to fail. So what Isaac did instead is he took the team that built it, including their leader, who was in his early 30s at that point, and said, right, this is now a separate line of business. You're responsible for the P&L. You have n number of years to make it profitable. Go. Now that's, I think,
different mindset.
Yeah, and that's 3-4 times larger than the rest of the bank combined.
Reframing.
Okay, so the key learnings are put an inordinate amount of responsibility on the natives of the technology. Provide them the support, provide them the adult supervision. But the decision, the accountability should be with the people who actually understand that technology. And so that's number one. The other one is you actually use the word digital transformation. I don't like it, that term actually, and I should have said this earlier. Digital transformations have two things in common. One is they're expensive, and two is they always fail. So my advice is don't transform, migrate. If you want to do business differently, create a small business unit that does it the new way and move the customers over. Trying to actually migrate, or sort of transform a business is an endless money pit that you will never get out of. Build it new and then move the customers over. Don't be have the courage to disintermediate yourself.
Digital reinvention and reframing, I hear that. Well, Areiel, thank you very much for joining me on the Scouting for Growth podcast.